The rotting floorboards of the 1920s hunting cabin groaned under Marcus Chen's boots as rain hammered the tin roof above. 6 months ago, he'd commanded a tech empire worth billions. Now, with his company bankrupt and his wife gone, this forgotten structure in the Cascade Mountains was all he had left. Marcus had come here to disappear, maybe forever. But when a loose board revealed a hidden basement carved directly into bedrock, everything changed. Ancient symbols covered the stone walls, symbols that matched his doctoral research in lost civilizations, the research he'd abandoned for Silicon Valley gold. The deeper he dug, the more impossible it became. Carbon dating samples in his makeshift lab, Marcus realized these weren't just cave paintings, they were star maps, technical blueprints, evidence of technology that shouldn't exist. Local hikers began reporting strange lights emanating from the cabin at night. Government vehicles started appearing on distant ridges. And Marcus discovered that losing everything might have been the only way to find something that would change the world forever. But who or what had built this underground chamber, and why were they so desperate to keep it hidden? He'd purchased this remote property sight unseen, desperate to escape the wreckage of his former life. The real estate listing had mentioned a rustic hunting cabin with historical character. They'd failed to mention the basement that extended 30 feet into solid granite. The air down here carried a metallic taste that reminded him of ozone after lightning strikes. Strange, considering they were sealed underground. Marcus pulled out his field notebook, the same weathered journal he'd used during his graduate work at Stanford 15 years ago. Back then, he'd been passionate about lost civilizations, spending summers on archaeological digs in Peru and Easter Island. That passion had died the moment he'd coded his first algorithm and watched his bank account explode. Now, surrounded by impossible artifacts, that old fire flickered back to life. The wall opposite the entrance caught his attention. Unlike the others, this section contained what appeared to be a relief map of star constellations. But as Marcus compared it to his astronomy apps, he realized the positions were wrong. Not wrong for today, but wrong for any known historical period. The arrangement suggested a perspective from somewhere else entirely, as if the map maker had been viewing Earth's night sky from a distant point in space. His satellite phone buzzed, startling him in the silence. The caller ID showed unknown, but the number looked government-issued. Marcus had seen enough federal investigations during his company's collapse to recognize the pattern. "Hello? Mr. Chen, this is Agent Sarah Reeves with the Department of Archaeological Security. We need to talk." Department of what? Marcus had never heard of such an agency. "We're aware of your recent discoveries. For your own safety, I strongly advise you to cease all excavation activities immediately." The line went dead. Marcus stared at the phone, his pulse quickening. How could they possibly know about the chamber? He'd told no one, hadn't even reported the find to local authorities, unless someone had been watching. He climbed back up to the main cabin, his mind racing. Through the rain-streaked windows, he scanned the tree line for any sign of surveillance. The forest appeared empty, but that meant nothing. Modern surveillance technology could hide anywhere. In the kitchen, he brewed coffee with hands that trembled slightly. The rational part of his mind, the part that had built a tech empire, urged caution. Walk away, sell the property, return to civilization, and rebuild his life. But the symbols haunted him. In 15 years of corporate success, nothing had given him the thrill he'd felt during those first moments in the chamber. This discovery could rewrite human history, could answer questions that had plagued archaeologists for centuries. His laptop chimed with an incoming message. The sender's address was a string of random characters, but the subject line made his blood run cold. "Some secrets are worth dying for." The message contained a single image, a photograph of Marcus taken through his cabin window just moments ago. In the background, clearly visible, was the open basement entrance. Someone was watching. Someone who knew exactly what he'd found, and they wanted him to know it. The rain hammered against the windshield as Marcus navigated the winding mountain road, his Tesla's GPS having lost signal 20 miles back. The luxury sedan felt absurdly out of place on the rutted gravel path, its low-profile tires struggling for purchase on the loose stones. Each pothole sent a jolt through his spine, a physical reminder of how far he'd fallen from his climate-controlled corner office 60 floors above downtown Portland. He'd bought the cabin sight unseen through a foreclosure auction 3 months ago, back when he still believed his empire was salvageable. It had seemed like a shrewd investment then, 40 acres of old-growth forest for less than the cost of his monthly wine budget. Now it represented his only remaining asset, the last piece of property the bankruptcy court hadn't seized. The headlights swept across towering Douglas firs that seemed to lean inward, creating a tunnel of green-black shadow. Marcus had expected rustic charm, perhaps a quaint log structure where he could lick his wounds and plan his comeback. What he found instead, after another mile of increasingly treacherous road, was something far more primitive. The cabin squatted in a small clearing like a forgotten relic, its weathered cedar siding dark with moisture and neglect. The structure couldn't have been more than 800 square feet, with a sagging front porch and windows so grimy they reflected nothing but darkness. A rusted metal chimney pipe jutted from the moss-covered roof at an alarming angle. Marcus sat in the car for several minutes, engine running, letting the reality sink in. This hovel was now his home. The man who had once owned a penthouse in Manhattan, a villa in Tuscany, and a compound in Big Sur was now reduced to this decaying shelter in the middle of nowhere. The rain showed no signs of letting up. He gathered his single suitcase from the trunk, all that remained of a wardrobe that had once filled 2 walk-in closets, and sprinted for the porch. The wooden steps groaned ominously under his weight, and he made a mental note to test their structural integrity in daylight, assuming he survived the night. The front door hung slightly ajar, swollen with moisture. Marcus had to put his shoulder into it to force it open, and when he did, the smell hit him immediately, not the musty odor of abandonment he'd expected, but something else. Something that reminded him of the Natural History Museum his father had taken him to as a child, all dust and ancient things and secrets waiting to be uncovered. His phone's flashlight revealed an interior that was surprisingly clean, as if someone had been maintaining it despite its external decay. The main room held the basics: a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area with a hand pump well, and a narrow staircase, leading to what he assumed was a loft bedroom. But it was what covered the walls that made him stop short. Dozens of them, some appearing to be geological surveys, others hand-drawn with symbols he didn't recognize. They were pinned and taped across every available surface, overlapping and connecting with lines of red string, like some conspiracy theorist's fever dream. In the dancing light of his phone, the markings seemed to shift and writhe. Marcus moved closer to examine one of the larger maps, a topographical survey of the local area. Someone had marked it extensively with pencil notations, elevation markers, and what looked like measurements. A series of X's formed a rough circle around a location about 2 miles north of the cabin, with the notation "primary site" confirmed, written in a careful scientific hand. A leather journal lay open on a rough-hewn wooden table, its pages filled with the same meticulous handwriting. Marcus flipped through entries dated over the past several months, written by someone named Dr. Marcus Chen, no relation as far as he knew, though the coincidence sent an odd chill down his spine. The entries spoke of unprecedented geological formations, anomalous mineral compositions, and structures that challenge current archaeological understanding. Marcus closed the journal, his hands trembling slightly. The previous occupant of his cabin hadn't been some hermit or squatter. She'd been a researcher, possibly an archaeologist, working on something she believed to be monumentally important enough to hole up in this remote location for months, mapping and measuring and documenting. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and sending something scratching across the roof. Marcus looked up at the ceiling, then back at the maps surrounding him, their red string connections forming a web that seemed to pulse in the uncertain light. He'd come here to disappear, to retreat from a world that had stripped him of everything he'd built. Instead, he'd stumbled into someone else's mystery. The silence of the forest pressed against Marcus like a physical weight as he stood on the cabin's sagging porch, surveying his new reality. 3 days had passed since he'd fled Seattle, and the absence of his former life's constant noise, phones buzzing, notifications chiming, the hum of servers and air conditioning, felt both liberating and terrifying. He'd found the cabin through a hastily arranged rental from a gruff local named Pete Garrison, who'd seemed more interested in the cash payment than asking questions about why a man in a $15,000 suit wanted to hide in the middle of nowhere. The structure itself was a testament to neglect: weathered cedar siding, a roof that leaked in at least 3 places, and windows so grimy they barely let in light. But it was perfect. No cell service, no internet, no way for the vultures circling his destroyed empire to find him. Marcus descended the creaking steps and began his morning ritual, a walk to the small creek that ran behind the property. The routine helped quiet the endless loop of recriminations in his head. If only he'd seen the SEC investigation coming. If only he'd listened to Elena's warnings about the board's machinations. If only he hadn't been so arrogant to think himself untouchable. The creek gurgled peacefully over smooth stones, and Marcus knelt to splash the icy water on his face. As he straightened, something caught his eye, a glint of metal partially buried in the creek bank. Curious, he dug into the soft earth with his fingers until he freed a small cylindrical object. It was clearly old, made of some kind of alloy he couldn't identify. Strange symbols were etched along its surface in a spiral pattern, unlike any writing system he'd ever seen. The metal felt warm despite having been buried in the cold earth, and it seemed to pulse with an almost imperceptible vibration. Marcus turned the object over in his hands, fascination cutting through his self-pity for the first time in days. His undergraduate degree had been in archaeology before he'd pivoted to computer science, and while his knowledge was rusty, he knew enough to recognize that this artifact was extraordinary. Back at the cabin, he cleared the dust-covered kitchen table and examined his find under the wan light filtering through the dirty windows. The symbols seemed to shift and flow when he wasn't looking directly at them, an optical illusion surely caused by the poor lighting and his exhausted state. But the craftsmanship was undeniable. Whoever had made this possessed metallurgical skills that seemed impossibly advanced. A knock at the door startled him from his examination. Marcus quickly wrapped the artifact in a dish towel before opening the door to find Pete Garrison standing on the porch, his weathered face creased with what might have been concern. "Thought I'd check on you," Pete said, his eyes scanning Marcus's appearance. 3 days of beard growth and the same wrinkled clothes probably made quite an impression. "You settling in okay?" "Fine," Marcus replied curtly, not moving to invite him in. Pete's gaze drifted past him into the cabin's dim interior. "You know, this place has quite a history. The previous owner was an interesting character, professor type, like yourself." "I'm not a professor." Right. Business, wasn't it?" Pete's knowing look suggested he might have recognized Marcus after all. "Anyway, Dr. Sarah Winters, that was her name. Archaeologist from the university, rented this place for nearly 5 years before she disappeared." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. "Disappeared?" "Oh, nothing sinister," Pete said quickly. "She just up and left one day about 6 months ago. Left behind all sorts of equipment, books, papers. I've been meaning to clear it out, but—" He shrugged. "Never got around to it. It's all stored in the root cellar if you're curious. Seemed like a shame to just throw it away." After Pete left, Marcus stood in the cabin's main room, the wrapped artifact seeming to burn in his hands. A missing archaeologist, equipment left behind, and now this strange object found practically on the doorstep. He made his way around the cabin's exterior until he found the root cellar, a wooden door set into the hillside behind the building. The rusty hinges protested as he pulled it open, releasing the musty smell of old paper and metal. His heart hammering, Marcus opened journal after journal. Dr. Sarah Winters had been documenting finds throughout the region, dozens of similar artifacts, all bearing the same mysterious script, Her notes spoke of a discovery that would rewrite human history and references to something called the threshold. The final entry, dated just days before her disappearance, contained only 4 words, "They know I'm close." The storm arrived without warning, transforming the gentle Oregon drizzle into a torrential downpour that hammered the cabin's tin roof like machine gun fire. Marcus had been examining the carved symbols on the wall for hours, sketching them in the margins of an old newspaper he'd found, when the lights flickered and died. In the sudden darkness, something extraordinary happened. The symbols began to glow. At first, Marcus thought his eyes were playing tricks on him, after images from staring too long at the carvings, but as his vision adjusted, there was no denying it. A soft blue-white phosphorescence emanated from the etched lines, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. He fumbled for his phone's flashlight, but when the LED hit the wall, the glow vanished. The moment he switched it off, the luminescence returned, stronger than before. Marcus's rational mind scrambled for explanations. Bioluminescent bacteria, some kind of phosphorescent paint. But even as he cycled through possibilities, he knew he was witnessing something unprecedented. The glow wasn't random. It followed patterns, spreading from symbol to symbol in a deliberate sequence that reminded him of data flowing through circuit boards. Thunder crashed overhead, and the cabin shuddered. In the split second of lightning that followed, Marcus saw something that made his blood freeze. The symbols weren't just on the wall behind the loose board. They covered everything. The entire back wall, the ceiling, even portions of the floor. The house itself was a canvas for this mysterious script. When darkness returned, the full scope of the illuminated text revealed itself. Hundreds of symbols, maybe thousands, arranged in complex geometric patterns that seemed to shift and flow in his peripheral vision. It was beautiful and terrifying, like discovering an alien cathedral in his grandfather's hunting cabin. A new sound cut through the storm, metal scraping against wood. Marcus spun toward the front door, but it remained closed. The sound came again, deliberate and rhythmic, like someone working with tools. It was coming from outside. The rational part of his mind suggested it was just a tree branch, but his instincts screamed otherwise. Someone was out there, in this storm, in the middle of nowhere. Marcus crept to the window and peered through the rain-streaked glass. Lightning illuminated the clearing in stark black and white, revealing a figure hunched near the cabin's foundation. The person wore dark, modern clothing, definitely not a lost hiker. They seemed to be examining something, running their hands along the wooden beams that supported the structure. Another flash of lightning, and the figure was gone. Marcus grabbed the poker from beside the cold fireplace and positioned himself behind the door. The scraping sound had stopped, replaced by footsteps on the wooden porch. Slow, deliberate steps that paused directly outside. "I know you're in there." The voice was clear despite the storm, a woman's voice, calm and educated. "We need to talk, Mr. Chen." She knew his name. Marcus tightened his grip on the poker. "I don't know who you are, but you're trespassing." "My name is Dr. Sarah Winters. I'm an archaeologist with the University of Oregon. Your grandfather contacted my department 3 months before he died." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. His grandfather had been reaching out to experts about the cabin, about what he'd found here. He was concerned about preserving what he'd discovered, Dr. Winters continued. "He made me promise that if anything happened to him, I'd make sure it didn't fall into the wrong hands." Marcus glanced back at the glowing wall. In the time they'd been talking, the luminescence had intensified, and new symbols seemed to be appearing, or perhaps becoming visible for the first time. "The wrong hands?" Marcus called out. As if summoned by her words, the distant rumble of engines cut through the storm. Vehicle engines, still far off, but growing closer. Marcus looked at the poker in his hands, then at the impossible display covering his wall. Whatever was happening here was bigger than his personal crisis, bigger than his failed marriage or bankruptcy. His grandfather had trusted Dr. Winters enough to contact her. Right now, she might be his only ally. He set down the poker and opened the door. Dr. Winters stood on his porch, soaked to the skin but alert. She was younger than her voice suggested, maybe early 30s, with short-cropped auburn hair and intelligent green eyes that immediately moved past him to focus on the glowing symbols behind him. "Dear God," she whispered. "It's even more extensive than he described." The engine sounds were getting closer. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the forest draped in crystalline silence. Marcus stood at the cabin's single window, watching steam rise from the wet earth as early sunlight filtered through the canopy. His breath fogged the glass as he pressed closer, studying the tree line where he'd heard those impossible sounds the night before. In daylight, everything appeared normal, too normal. The kind of pristine wilderness that real estate developers dreamed of conquering. Yet something felt fundamentally wrong about this place, like a photograph with subtle distortions that took time to notice. He pulled on his hiking boots and stepped outside. The air carried scents of pine and damp soil, but underneath lurked something else, metallic and sharp, like copper pennies left in rain. Marcus followed the smell toward the spot where he'd seen the strange lights, his footsteps muffled by layers of fallen needles. 20 yards from the cabin he found them. Depressions in the earth, perfectly circular and roughly 3 feet across. Not the chaotic gouges that falling branches would leave, but precise impressions pressed deep into the soil. The metallic scent grew stronger here, making his sinuses burn. Marcus knelt beside the nearest depression, running his fingers along its smooth edges. The compacted earth felt warm despite the morning chill, and when he lifted his hand, his fingertips came away stained with a substance that looked like rust but moved like liquid mercury. His phone buzzed. Sarah's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment he considered ignoring it. But old habits died hard, even in exile. "Marcus?" Her voice carried relief and frustration in equal measure. "Thank God. I've been trying to reach you for hours. No signal up here," he lied, wiping his stained fingers on his jeans. "What's wrong?" "Everything. The bankruptcy proceedings hit a snag. Apparently, someone's contesting the asset seizures. They're claiming prior ownership of certain properties, including—" "Sarah, I don't care anymore." The words surprised him with their honesty. Let them have it all. Silence stretched between them before she spoke again, her voice softer. "Marcus, where exactly are you? This cabin you mentioned? Do you have a deed, any paperwork?" He almost laughed. "Found it abandoned. Figured nobody would miss a squatter for a few weeks." "That's what I was afraid of. Marcus, I've been doing research on your location. That area has some complicated history. Land disputes going back decades, maybe longer. You need to be careful." The metallic scent grew stronger, carried on a breeze that seemed to come from nowhere. Marcus felt dizzy suddenly, as if the ground beneath him had shifted imperceptibly. "I have to go," he said, ending the call before Sarah could protest. He stood slowly, fighting waves of nausea, and noticed something that made his blood turn cold. The circular depressions weren't random. They formed a pattern, a spiral that curved away from the cabin and disappeared into the deeper woods. Each depression was slightly larger than the last, as if whatever had made them was growing. Marcus followed the trail despite every instinct screaming at him to return to the cabin. The spiral led him downhill through increasingly dense forest, past trees that seemed older and more gnarled than those near the cabin. The canopy thickened overhead until only scattered beams of sunlight penetrated the gloom. After 20 minutes of hiking, the depression stopped abruptly at the edge of a clearing he hadn't noticed from above. The space was perfectly circular, roughly 50 feet across, and completely devoid of vegetation. The exposed earth looked scorched, as if subjected to intense heat, but no fire could have burned so precisely without touching the surrounding trees. At the center of the clearing sat something that made Marcus question his sanity. A structure, if it could be called that, rose from the barren ground like a geometric flower. Metallic surfaces caught and reflected light in impossible ways, creating patterns that hurt to look at directly. The thing stood roughly 8 feet tall and appeared to be growing from the earth itself, its base disappearing seamlessly into the soil. Marcus approached slowly, his scientific mind cataloguing details even as primitive fear urged him to flee. The structure's surface wasn't quite metal, wasn't quite stone. It seemed to shift between states of matter, solid one moment and flowing like liquid the next. Symbols covered its visible faces, not carved but somehow integral to the material itself, glowing faintly with inner light. He reached toward the nearest surface, then jerked his hand back as the symbols pulsed brighter. The air around the structure hummed with barely audible frequency that resonated in his bones. This wasn't some abandoned art installation or geological anomaly. This was something that shouldn't exist, couldn't exist according to everything he knew about physics and materials science. Yet here it stood, undeniably real and obviously ancient despite its impossible preservation. Marcus backed away slowly, his mind racing. Whatever this thing was, it connected to the cabin somehow. The previous owner hadn't abandoned the property, they'd been guarding it, and now he was alone with humanity's most dangerous secret. The metallic hum grew stronger as Marcus descended the crude wooden steps, each creak echoing in the confined space below. His phone's flashlight carved through the darkness, revealing rough-hewn stone walls that seemed far older than the cabin above. The air grew cooler with each step, carrying a mineral scent that reminded him of museum basements where ancient artifacts waited in climate-controlled silence. At the bottom, Marcus found himself in a circular chamber carved directly from bedrock. The walls bore no tool marks he could identify, no chisel strikes, no drill patterns, nothing that suggested modern excavation. Instead, the surfaces appeared almost melted, as if the stone had been shaped by tremendous heat rather than cut away. His light swept across the chamber's perimeter, catching glimpses of symbols etched deep into the walls. They weren't like any ancient writing he'd seen in documentaries or textbooks. These markings seemed to shift and flow in the dancing shadows, creating an optical illusion that made his eyes water. Some resembled mathematical equations, others looked almost like circuit diagrams, but all of them shared an otherworldly precision that made his skin crawl. In the center of the chamber sat a low stone table, its surface covered by what appeared to be a tattered canvas tarp. Marcus approached slowly, his breathing shallow in the thin air. The metallic humming seemed to emanate from beneath the covering, a subtle vibration that he could feel in his chest as much as here. With trembling fingers, he pulled back the tarp. The object beneath defied immediate comprehension. It was roughly the size of a briefcase, but seemed to be constructed from a material that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. The surface appeared smooth yet somehow textured, like looking at water from above while knowing it contained hidden depths. Thin lines of pale blue light pulsed across its surface in patterns that reminded Marcus uncomfortably of neural networks, or perhaps circuit boards designed by a mind that operated on principles he couldn't fathom. As he stared, one of the light patterns brightened and began to trace a path toward what might have been an interface panel. Without thinking, Marcus reached out to touch it. The moment his fingertip made contact, the chamber exploded with light. The symbols on the walls blazed to life, casting dancing shadows that seemed to move independently of his flashlight. Images flashed through his mind, vast cities of impossible architecture, beings that might once have been human but had evolved beyond recognition, machines that harvested energy from stars themselves. He jerked his hand back, gasping, but the visions continued. He saw the Earth as it had been millions of years ago, watched civilizations rise and fall in fast forward, witnessed technologies that made his own innovations seem like children's toys. Through it all, he sensed a presence, ancient, patient, and utterly alien, that had been waiting for someone to find this place. His phone buzzed with an incoming call, the mundane sound jarring him back to reality. Sarah's name appeared on the screen, but his hands were shaking too badly to answer. The call went to voicemail, then immediately started ringing again and again. Finally managing to steady his grip, Marcus answered on the fourth attempt. "Marcus, thank God," Sarah's voice crackled through the poor reception. "I've been trying to reach you for hours. Something's happened." "What kind of something?" He climbed the stairs as he spoke, desperate to put distance between himself and the chamber below. "Your former business partner, David Kim, he's been asking around about you, specifically about where you might have gone. He's hired people, Marcus, professional people." Marcus felt his blood turn cold. David had been his closest friend and collaborator until the patent theft that had destroyed his company. If David was looking for him now, it could only mean one thing. Somehow word had gotten out about what lay hidden in these woods. "How could he possibly know I'm here?" Marcus asked, though even as he spoke he realized the answer. The cabin's deed was a matter of public record, and David knew about Marcus's connection to his grandfather's papers. "I don't know, but Marcus, you need to leave, tonight. These aren't just lawyers or private investigators. The man asking questions about you had military bearing, and he was asking very specific questions about geological surveys and archaeological permits." Marcus looked back toward the basement entrance, then out the cabin windows at the darkening forest. Somewhere out there, people were coming who would undoubtedly want to claim his discovery for themselves. The question was whether he could escape with the artifact, and whether he should. The decision, he realized, might determine the future of human civilization itself. The wooden box felt heavier than it should have as Marcus carried it back to the cabin. His hands trembled, not from the weight, but from the implications of what he'd found. The carved symbols seemed to pulse with their own energy, and twice during the short walk back, he could have sworn he heard a low, humming sound emanating from within. Inside the cabin, Marcus cleared the kitchen table and set the box down with reverent care. The late afternoon sun streamed through the dirty windows, casting long shadows across the worn wood surface. He pulled out his phone and snapped dozens of photos from every angle, though he doubted the camera could capture the subtle way the symbols seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at them. The lid bore the same spiral motif he'd seen on the metal fragment, but here it was surrounded by what looked like a star map. Constellations he didn't recognize formed geometric patterns that hurt his eyes if he stared too long. Along the edges, smaller symbols marched in neat rows, some resembling cuneiform, others completely alien to anything in his admittedly limited knowledge of ancient writing systems. Marcus had built his fortune on taking calculated risks, but this felt different. Every instinct screamed that opening this box would change everything. He thought of Sarah's voice on the phone yesterday, cold and distant as she discussed custody arrangements. He thought of the board meeting where his oldest friends had voted him out without meeting his eyes. What did he have left to lose? The lid lifted with surprising ease, revealing an interior lined with what appeared to be black velvet, though the material felt strange under his fingertips, too smooth, too warm. Nestled within were three objects that made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. The first was a crystal unlike anything he'd ever seen. About the size of his fist, it was perfectly clear except for the light that seemed to move within it like trapped lightning. The surface was covered in microscopic etchings that formed patterns similar to those on the box's exterior. Beside it lay a metal disc, slightly larger than a dinner plate. Its surface was mirror-bright, despite what must have been centuries or millennia of age. More symbols covered this artifact, but these seemed to move when he watched them, rearranging themselves in slow, hypnotic patterns. The third object was the most disturbing, a small figurine carved from what looked like bone, though it was far too heavy to be hollow. It depicted a humanoid figure, but the proportions were wrong. The head was too large, the limbs too long, and there were details that suggested features no human had ever possessed. Yet something about it was hauntingly familiar, as if he'd seen it in dreams he couldn't quite remember. As Marcus reached for the crystal, his phone buzzed. Sarah's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment he considered ignoring it. But old habits died hard, and he'd spent 15 years answering every call from his wife, no matter what else was happening. "Marcus? Thank God. I've been trying to reach you for hours." Sarah's voice was different, worried, almost frantic. "Where are you?" "I told you. Oregon. The cabin." He kept his eyes on the crystal, watching the light dance within its depths. "What's wrong?" "Someone broke into the house last night." "Into our house, Marcus. They didn't take anything valuable, left the jewelry, the electronics, everything. But they went through your office, your files. The police think they were looking for something specific. Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. Did they? They found the deed to your grandfather's property. It was on the desk, like they'd been studying it. Marcus, what aren't you telling me? What's really going on? His hand hovered over the crystal. The light within pulsed faster now, almost urgently. I don't know. I'm trying to figure that out myself. Come home, please. Whatever this is, we can handle it together. The kids are asking about you and I... Her voice broke slightly. I'm scared, Marcus. This feels bigger than just the company, bigger than us. The rational part of his mind, the part that had built a tech empire from nothing, screamed at him to listen to her. Pack up, drive back to Portland, face whatever was coming like a civilized person. But his fingers were already closing around the crystal, and the moment they made contact, the world exploded into sensation. Visions flooded his mind. Ancient forests, where trees grew in impossible spirals. Structures that defied geometry rising from misty valleys. And figures, tall, graceful beings whose faces he couldn't quite see, but whose presence filled him with a mixture, terror and longing so intense, it brought tears to his eyes. Marcus? Marcus? Are you there? Sarah's voice seemed to come from very far away. The crystal was warm in his palm now, almost hot, and the humming sound had returned, louder than before. I have to go, he whispered into the phone. Don't you dare hang up on me. Don't you? He ended the call and turned off the phone. Whatever was happening, whatever he'd stumbled into, there was no going back now. The morning sun filtered through the cabin's grimy windows as Marcus spread the translated pages across the wooden table. His hands trembled slightly, whether from caffeine withdrawal or excitement he couldn't tell. The symbols that had tormented him for weeks now revealed their secrets in Dr. Reeves' careful translations. The journal belonged to a man named Ezekiel Blackwood, dated 1847. A geologist by training, Blackwood had come to Oregon Territory following rumors of unusual rock formations. What he'd found defied everything he understood about the natural world. Day 47. The metallic chamber extends far deeper than initially estimated. My instruments detect no end to its depth. The walls appear to be composed of an unknown alloy that shows no signs of oxidation despite what must be centuries of exposure to moisture. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. The cave system beneath his feet was artificial, engineered by someone with technology that shouldn't have existed in any known ancient civilization. Day 52. The hieroglyphs continue in an unbroken sequence for nearly a quarter-mile into the tunnel. My attempts to photograph them have failed repeatedly. The metal seems to absorb light in ways that confound my equipment. I have resorted to making rubbings and careful sketches. The sketches filled the margins of Blackwood's journal, intricate symbols that seemed to dance before Marcus's eyes. Some resembled mathematical equations, others looked almost like star charts. All of them felt hauntingly familiar, as if he'd seen them in dreams he couldn't quite remember. Day 58. I have made a discovery that shakes me to my very core. Deep within the structure, I have found what can only be described as a vast chamber. The ceiling stretches so high that my torchlight cannot reach it, but it is not the size that disturbs me. It is what the chamber contains. Marcus turned the page eagerly, but the next entry was dated a full week later. Blackwood's usually precise handwriting had become erratic, almost frantic. Day 65. I should not have entered the inner sanctum. God forgive me, I should have sealed this place and walked away. The knowledge contained within defies natural law. I have seen things that suggest our understanding of human history is fundamentally flawed. The entries became increasingly disjointed. Blackwood wrote of chambers filled with crystalline structures that hummed with energy, of walls covered in what appeared to be star maps, showing constellations that wouldn't be discovered for another century. Most disturbing of all were his descriptions of the artifacts. Day 73. The objects in the central chamber are not of earthly origin. I stake my reputation as a man of science on this assertion. The craftsmanship, the materials, the very purpose of these items suggests a level of technological sophistication that our civilization has yet to achieve. Marcus set down the pages and walked to the cabin's door, stepping outside into the crisp mountain air. Somewhere beneath his feet lay the answers to questions he'd never thought to ask. His previous life, the boardrooms, the stock prices, the endless pursuit of digital innovation seemed laughably insignificant compared to what Blackwood had discovered. But the journal's final entries filled him with unease. Blackwood's tone shifted from scientific excitement to something approaching terror. Day 81. They come to me in dreams now, the builders of this place. I see their faces, though they are not quite human faces as we understand them. They speak without words, showing me visions of what was and what is yet to come. Day 84. I understand now why this place was sealed. Some knowledge is too dangerous for mankind to possess. I have decided to collapse the main entrance. Let this tomb remain buried until humanity is wise enough to use what lies within. Day 87. My final entry. The fever grows worse. Perhaps it is merely my body's response to weeks underground, breathing stale air. Or perhaps this place exacts a price from those who would learn its secrets. I go now to seal the passage. May God have mercy on my soul, and on the souls of any who follow after me. He thought about Dr. Reeves's comment about the global archaeological community. If word got out about this discovery, his solitary retreat would become a circus of researchers, government officials, and treasure hunters. The pristine silence that had helped heal his shattered mind would be lost forever. But the pull of discovery was stronger than his desire for solitude. Marcus had spent his career pushing the boundaries of what technology could achieve. This was the ultimate frontier, not the next breakthrough in artificial intelligence or quantum computing, but evidence of intelligence that predated human civilization itself. As the sun reached its zenith, Marcus made his decision. He would enter the tunnel system one more time, but this time he would go deeper. He would find Blackwood's inner sanctum and see for himself what had driven a rational man to write with such fevered urgency about sealing away forbidden knowledge. The afternoon stretched before him like an open door, waiting. The symbols seemed to pulse with their own inner light as Marcus traced his finger along the ancient carved lines. Each character was roughly the size of his palm, etched deep into what appeared to be some kind of metallic stone he couldn't identify. The surface felt warm beneath his touch, almost alive. Sarah knelt beside him, her archaeological training evident in the careful way she documented each symbol with her camera. This writing system predates anything we've seen by millennia, she whispered, as if speaking too loudly might disturb whatever forces had preserved this chamber. Look at the complexity. This isn't primitive at all. It's sophisticated beyond anything from that era. Marcus pulled back his hand, unsettled by the tingling sensation that traveled up his arm each time he made contact with the symbols. The chamber stretched before them, roughly circular and perhaps 50 feet across. The walls rose into darkness above the reach of their flashlights, creating the impression of a vast cathedral carved from living rock. "Over here!" Elena called from the far side of the chamber. Her voice echoed strangely, seeming to come from multiple directions at once. "You need to see this!" They made their way carefully across the uneven floor, their lights dancing across more symbols embedded in the stone beneath their feet. Marcus noticed that the symbols on the floor seemed to form pathways like some kind of ancient roadmap leading deeper into the mountain. Elena stood before what could only be described as an altar, a raised platform of the same metallic stone surrounded by 7 tall pillars. But it was what lay on the platform that made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. A sphere, perfectly round and roughly the size of a basketball, hovered 3 feet above the altar's surface. It wasn't supported by anything visible, simply floating in the air, as if gravity had no claim on it. Its surface appeared to be made of the same material as the symbols, but instead of being carved with markings, it seemed to contain them, symbols that moved and shifted within the sphere like living things swimming through crystal. "That's impossible," Marcus breathed, his rational mind rebelling against what his eyes clearly showed him. Sarah had gone very still, her camera forgotten in her hands. "The electromagnetic readings Tom mentioned, they're coming from that thing. I can feel it from here." As if responding to her words, the sphere began to rotate slowly, and the symbols within it moved faster, creating patterns that seemed almost like a language being spoken in light and shadow. Elena stepped closer, but Marcus grabbed her arm. "Don't. We don't know what it is, or what it might do." She looked at him with eyes that seemed older than they had just minutes before. "But I think I do know. These symbols, this chamber, I've been dreaming about them for weeks. Ever since the first electromagnetic pulse was detected." "What do you mean, dreaming?" Sarah asked, but Elena was already moving toward the sphere, Marcus's grip apparently forgotten. "Elena, stop," he commanded, but she continued forward as if in a trance. The moment she came within arm's reach of the floating object, the chamber filled with a low harmonic vibration that seemed to resonate in their bones. The symbols carved into the walls began to glow with the same inner light Marcus had imagined earlier, but now there was no question. It was real. Elena reached out her hand toward the sphere, and Marcus lunged forward to pull her back. But as his fingers closed around her wrist, something extraordinary happened. Images flooded his mind, not his own memories, but something far older and more profound. And then came the catastrophe, a cosmic event that tore across the sky like the wrath of angry gods. He watched civilizations that had endured for thousands of years crumble in a matter of days. But before the end, the survivors had hidden something precious deep within the earth, leaving markers for those who might one day be ready to understand. The vision ended abruptly as Sarah pulled both Marcus and Elena away from the sphere. They collapsed together on the chamber floor, gasping as if they'd been holding their breath underwater. "What did you see?" Sarah demanded, helping them sit up. And something told him that whatever cosmic catastrophe had destroyed that ancient world was coming again. The satellite phone crackled to life at dawn, its harsh electronic tone shattering the forest silence. Marcus stared at the device for 3 rings before answering, knowing that whoever had this number meant business. "Mr. Chen," the voice was crisp, professional, unfamiliar. "My name is Director Sarah Voss, National Security Agency. We need to talk." Marcus felt his blood turn cold. Through the cabin window he could see the morning mist rising from the trees, peaceful and undisturbed, but that peace was about to end. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said carefully. "The electromagnetic anomalies emanating from your location suggest otherwise. We've been monitoring unusual energy signatures in your area for the past 72 hours, signatures that coincide with your recent archaeological activities." Marcus closed his eyes. Of course they'd been watching. The artifact's power hadn't just revealed ancient secrets, it had apparently lit up every government sensor for hundreds of miles. "Sir, I'm going to need you to remain exactly where you are. A team is en route to your location." The line went dead. Marcus grabbed his backpack and began stuffing it with supplies. Whatever was hidden in that chamber, whatever civilization had left those symbols and that impossible technology, the government couldn't be allowed to weaponize it. He'd seen enough destruction in his former life, the way pure discovery got twisted into tools of control and warfare. The artifact pulsed warm against his chest as he shouldered the pack. Outside, he could already hear the distant thrum of helicopter rotors growing closer. He slipped out the back of the cabin and melted into the tree line just as 3 black helicopters crested the ridge. Through the branches he watched armed figures rappel down, moving with military precision toward the cabin. They'd find it empty, but they'd also find the entrance to the chamber. Marcus pushed deeper into the wilderness, following game trails and creek beds, anything that would mask his passage. The artifact seemed to grow warmer the further he traveled from the cabin, as if it was guiding him towards something, or someone. After hours of hiking, he emerged into a clearing he'd never seen before. In the center stood a massive Douglas fir, easily 8 feet in diameter, its trunk scarred with the same spiral symbols he'd found in the chamber. But these weren't carved. They seemed to grow from within the wood itself, golden veins that pulsed with faint light. "You're learning to listen." "My name is Elena Crowfeather," she said. "I've been waiting for you, Marcus Chen." "How do you know my name?" "The same way I knew you'd find the chamber. The same way my grandmother knew, and her grandmother before her." She gestured to the glowing symbols on the tree. "We've been guardians here for 7 generations, protecting what was left behind." "Left behind by who?" Elena smiled, the expression both sad and knowing. "Walk with me." She led him to a natural bowl in the earth, hidden by overhanging branches. Ancient stone seats formed a circle around a central depression, filled with what looked like crystallized starlight, the same material as the artifact. "They called themselves the Architects," Elena began, settling onto one of the stone seats. "Not their real name, of course. That was lost when they departed. They came here thousands of years ago, before the ice, before the tribes, before history as your people understand it." Marcus touched the artifact through his shirt. "They weren't human." "No, but they weren't conquerors either. They were refugees, fleeing something terrible in the stars. They built sanctuaries like this one across the world, hiding their knowledge, their technology, their warnings." "Warnings about what?" Elena's eyes grew distant. "What drove them from their home? What follows in their wake, moving between worlds like a plague?" The architects tried to prepare future civilizations, leaving behind tools and knowledge for those who would listen. The artifact suddenly blazed with heat against Marcus's chest. Above them, the symbols on the great tree flared to brilliant life, and he could hear the sound of helicopters growing closer. "They've found us," he said. Elena stood, her weathered hands surprisingly strong as she gripped his shoulders. "The chamber you discovered is just the beginning, Marcus. There are others, connected by paths of energy that circle the globe. The architects built a network, a warning system." "A warning system for what?" "For when the hunters return." Her eyes reflected the golden light of the symbols. "And according to the signs, according to what my family has guarded for 7 generations, that time is now." The helicopter sounds grew deafening. Through the trees, Marcus could see searchlights cutting through the gathering dusk. Elena pressed something into his hand, a small carved stone that felt warm to the touch. "There's another sanctuary 2 days north. Find it before they find you." She vanished into the forest like smoke, leaving Marcus alone as the first soldiers burst into the clearing. The photograph trembled in Marcus's hands as he studied the face staring back at him from the faded image. The resemblance was unmistakable. The same angular jawline, the same deep-set eyes, even the same stubborn cowlick that refused to stay down. But this man wore clothes from another era, standing beside what appeared to be the very chamber Marcus had discovered beneath the cabin. "Impossible," he whispered. But the evidence was right there in black and white. Dr. Sarah Winters looked up from the journal she'd been translating. "What did you find?" Marcus handed her the photograph without a word. Her eyebrows shot up as she examined it, then looked back at him, then at the photo again. "Marcus, this man could be your twin. Who is he?" According to the writing on the back, his name was Jonathan Chen. The date says 1897. Marcus sank into the rickety chair, his mind reeling. Chen isn't exactly a rare surname, but the resemblance, family resemblance, can be strong. But this is extraordinary. Sarah set the photo carefully on the table. "Have you researched your family history? Do you know if you had ancestors in Oregon during that period?" Marcus shook his head. "My great-grandfather immigrated from China in the early 1900s. That's all I know. My family wasn't big on preserving records. They were more focused on moving forward than looking back." Sarah returned to the journal, her fingers tracing the careful script. "This becomes more intriguing by the page. According to these entries, Jonathan Chen wasn't just a casual observer. He was part of a secret expedition funded by something called the Meridian Society. They were specifically searching for what they called the First City. The same thing we found? It appears so. Listen to this entry. The symbols match those found in Dr. Whitmore's collection from the Tibetan expedition. We are closer than ever to proving the ancient connection between the continents. The chamber beneath the ridge contains artifacts that predate any known civilization by millennia. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. So this has been known about for over a century. Why isn't it in history books? Keep listening. The next entry is dated 3 weeks later. Disaster has struck. The Society has ordered all records destroyed. They claim the discovery is too dangerous, that it would upset the foundations of religion and science alike. I have hidden what I could, but they are coming for me. If anyone finds this journal, know that what lies beneath is real, and it changes everything we thought we knew about human origins. The cabin fell silent except for the whisper of wind through the trees outside. Marcus stared at the photograph of his doppelganger, trying to process the implications. "There's more," Sarah continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "The final entry. I have sealed the chamber as best I can. The key is in the bloodline. Only Chen blood can unlock what needs to remain hidden until the world is ready. I pray my descendants will be wiser than we were." Marcus's blood ran cold. "Bloodline. You think that's why I was able to open the chamber when others couldn't? The lockbox in the wall. You said it opened easily for you, but the previous researchers couldn't access it. Maybe it wasn't chance that brought you here, Marcus. Maybe it was something deeper." A sudden crack from outside made them both freeze. Through the grimy window, Marcus caught a glimpse of movement between the trees, dark figures moving with purpose toward the cabin. "We have company," he whispered, quickly gathering the journal and photographs. Sarah peered through another window. 3 men, maybe 4. They're not dressed like hikers. Marcus's corporate instincts kicked in. Back door, now. They grabbed their essential findings and slipped out through the cabin's rear exit just as heavy footsteps reached the front porch. Marcus led Sarah into the dense underbrush, using skills he'd developed during his weeks alone in the wilderness. Behind them, they heard the cabin door slam open, followed by gruff voices and the sound of furniture being overturned. "They're searching for something," Sarah breathed in his ear as they crouched behind a fallen log. "The question is whether they're after us or what we found." One of the voices carried through the trees. "The chamber's been accessed recently. Fresh footprints leading down. Boss isn't going to like this." Another voice responded, "Find everything they took. The Society's been looking for these artifacts for over a century. We're not leaving empty-handed." Marcus felt Sarah tense beside him. The Meridian Society, the same organization mentioned in Jonathan Chen's journal, was still active after all these years, and somehow they knew about the discovery. As the searchers spread out from the cabin, Marcus realized their archaeological adventure had just become something far more dangerous. Whatever his ancestor had died to protect was valuable enough that people were still willing to kill for it over a century later. The satellite phone's static crackled through the cave system as Marcus pressed himself against the cold stone wall. Dr. Reeves' voice cut in and out, fragments of words that chilled him more than the mountain air seeping through the ancient passages. Government contracts, Chen's discovery, military applications. Marcus killed the connection and removed the battery, his hands trembling. 3 days had passed since he'd contacted Reeves about the symbols, and now black SUVs were winding up the mountain road toward his cabin. From his position high in the cave network, he could see their dust trails through the narrow opening he'd discovered that morning. The chamber behind him pulsed with that otherworldly blue light, the crystalline formations humming with energy that seemed to respond to his presence. He'd spent the last 72 hours mapping the symbol sequences, photographing everything with Sarah's old camera, documenting what might be humanity's greatest discovery. Now it seemed he might lose it all again. Heavy footsteps echoed from the cabin below, voices shouting orders. Marcus gathered his notebooks and the translated fragments, stuffing them into his backpack alongside emergency supplies. The cave system was vast. He'd only explored a fraction of it, but somewhere in these depths lay answers that powerful people were willing to kill for. A new voice drifted up from outside, crisp and authoritative. The energy readings are strongest near the tree line. He's found something significant. Energy readings. Marcus's blood ran cold. They'd been monitoring the site, probably for longer than he realized. His isolation hadn't been protection. It had been surveillance. He moved deeper into the cave, following passages that seemed to spiral down into the mountain's heart. The symbols grew more complex here, covering entire walls in intricate patterns that hurt to look at directly. Some sections appeared to move in his peripheral vision, rearranging themselves when he wasn't watching. The blue light intensified as he descended, and with it came whispers, not quite sounds, but impressions pressed directly into his consciousness. Images flashed through his mind, vast cities beneath impossible skies, beings of light manipulating forces beyond comprehension, and always the same recurring symbol, a spiral intersected by 7 lines. His phone vibrated. Somehow, impossibly, he had signaled deep underground. The text was from an unknown number. "They killed Reeves. You're next. Trust no one. A friend." Marcus stared at the message until the screen went dark. Dr. Reeves, dead. The man who'd helped him understand the initial translations, who'd seemed genuinely excited about the discovery. How many others would die for whatever secret lay buried in these caves? A distant rumble echoed through the passages. Explosives. They were blasting their way in. He ran now, abandoning stealth for speed, the blue light guiding him through twisting corridors that seemed older than civilization itself. The symbols here were different, more urgent somehow, as if left by someone fleeing in desperate haste. The passage opened into a vast underground chamber that defied the mountain's geology. Crystalline spires stretched up into darkness, connected by bridges of what looked like solidified light. At the chamber's center sat a structure that made Marcus's mind reel. Perfectly geometric yet impossibly complex, its surfaces covered in the same spiral symbols but arranged in patterns that seemed to fold in on themselves. As he approached, the structure responded. Panels slid open with no visible mechanism, revealing an interior filled with floating displays of pure energy. The displays showed Earth from space, but not as he'd ever seen it. The continents were different, the ice caps absent, and strange lights dotted the surface in regular patterns. One display zoomed in on a familiar coastline, the Pacific Northwest but transformed. Where Portland should be, a massive crystalline city rose from the landscape. Other displays showed similar cities worldwide, all connected by streams of energy that pulsed in synchronized patterns. The implications hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't just an archaeological site. It was a record of Earth's hidden history, proof of a civilization that had thrived long before recorded time, a civilization with technology that made his former tech empire look like stone tools. Explosions echoed closer now, accompanied by shouting voices and the whine of drilling equipment. They'd found his trail. Marcus photographed everything he could, his camera's flash reflecting off surfaces that seemed to exist in more dimensions than his eyes could process. As he worked, understanding dawned. The energy signatures they'd detected weren't just residual. This technology was still active, still waiting. The spiral symbol appeared on every display now, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. As he reached toward it, the chamber filled with harmonious tones that resonated in his bones. Knowledge flooded his mind. Not just information, but understanding. The civilization hadn't vanished, they'd transcended, leaving behind guardians and instructions for those who would come after. Footsteps echoed in the passage behind him. His pursuers had found the chamber. Marcus grabbed his pack and ran toward what looked like solid wall, trusting the knowledge burning in his consciousness. The stone parted like water, revealing another passage as ancient lights awakened to guide his way. The satellite phone crackled to life at dawn, its shrill tone cutting through the morning mist like a blade. Marcus bolted upright from his makeshift bed near the cave entrance, his heart hammering against his ribs. 3 weeks had passed since he'd last heard from the outside world, 3 weeks of careful excavation and mind-bending discoveries that had consumed every waking moment. "Chen here," he answered, his voice hoarse from disuse. "Marcus, thank God." It was Sarah Martinez, his former research director at Chen Technologies. "I've been trying to reach you for days. We have a problem." Marcus felt his stomach drop. He'd been so focused on the artifacts, on the impossible implications of what lay buried beneath the Oregon soil, that he'd almost forgotten about the legal vultures circling his collapsed empire. "How bad?" he asked, though part of him didn't want to know. Hartwell Industries filed an injunction yesterday. They're claiming you used their proprietary algorithms in the quantum processing patents. If it sticks, they'll seize everything, including any ongoing research projects. Sarah's voice carried the weight of devastating news. "Marcus, they know about the land. Someone leaked the property records." The satellite phone nearly slipped from Marcus's grip. Hartwell Industries, his former partner turned bitter rival after their collaboration soured 5 years ago. James Hartwell had been waiting for an opportunity like this, and Marcus's financial collapse had given him the perfect opening. "How long do I have?" Marcus asked, his eyes drifting to the cave entrance where ancient symbols seemed to pulse with otherworldly significance in the early light. "Maybe a week before they can get a court order for a full asset investigation. If they find out what you're really doing up there." Sarah's voice trailed off, but the implication was clear. Hartwell wouldn't just seize the land, he'd claim credit for the discovery that could rewrite human history. Marcus ended the call and stared at the artifacts he'd carefully arranged on a tarp outside the cave. 3 weeks of painstaking excavation had yielded treasures beyond imagination, crystalline devices that hummed with residual energy, metallic tablets covered in script that seemed to shift when viewed directly, and geometric tools whose purpose defied explanation. But the crown jewel remained the chamber itself, a vast underground complex that appeared to extend far deeper than his preliminary explorations had revealed. The sound of approaching vehicles shattered the morning silence. Marcus grabbed his binoculars and scrambled up the rocky outcropping that overlooked the access road. 3 black SUVs wound their way up the mountain trail, still several miles away but closing fast. Even from this distance, he could see they weren't Forest Service vehicles. But as he worked, Marcus realized the futility of his situation. The chamber itself couldn't be moved, couldn't be hidden. And within that chamber lay evidence of something extraordinary, a civilization that had existed in North America thousands of years before any known settlement, possessing technology that shouldn't have been possible for its time period. The vehicles were closer now, their engines echoing off the canyon walls. Marcus made a desperate decision. Pulling out his camera, he began documenting everything with manic precision. Every symbol on the cave walls, every artifact he'd uncovered, every measurement and observation he'd recorded in his field notes. If Hartwell's people were going to steal his discovery, at least Marcus would have proof of what he'd found. A flash of inspiration struck him as he uploaded the photos to an encrypted cloud server. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the archaeologist whose work had first led him to understand the significance of his grandfather's cabin. She was currently leading a dig in Peru, far from Hartwell's influence. If Marcus could get the data to her, she could verify his findings independently. The sound of car doors slamming echoed from below. Marcus had minutes at most before they reached the cave. He sealed the entrance as best he could, using fallen rocks and debris to camouflage the opening, though he knew it would only buy him time. Then he shouldered his pack and began climbing the steep trail that led to the ridgeline. Behind him, voices carried on the wind, professional, authoritative, closing in. Marcus pushed himself harder up the mountain, his legs burning with effort. The greatest archaeological discovery in human history hung in the balance, and he was the only thing standing between it and those who would exploit it for profit rather than knowledge. At the ridgeline, he paused for one last look at the cave that had changed everything. Whatever happened next, the truth was out there now, documented and protected. The ancients who had built that chamber had waited millennia for their story to be told. Marcus disappeared into the wilderness, carrying their secrets with him. The ancient chamber stretched endlessly into shadow, its walls carved with symbols that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. Marcus pressed forward, his headlamp beam dancing across hieroglyphs that defied classification, part Egyptian, part Sumerian, yet somehow older than both civilizations combined. Behind him, Sarah's breathing echoed in the vast space. They had descended through the hidden passage for what felt like hours, following a spiral staircase cut directly into the mountain's bedrock. The air grew warmer as they went deeper, carrying with it the faint scent of ozone and something else, something that reminded Marcus of the moments before a thunderstorm. "Marcus," Sarah whispered, her voice tight with awe. "Look at this." He turned to find her standing before a massive stone tablet, its surface covered in intricate carvings. Unlike the other symbols they had encountered, these were accompanied by what appeared to be star charts, constellations mapped with mathematical precision that wouldn't be achieved by human astronomers for millennia. "The positioning is perfect," Sarah breathed, running her fingers along the carved lines. "This shows the night sky as it would have appeared 12,000 years ago, but with corrections for stellar drift that we only calculated in the last century." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the underground temperature. "That's impossible. No ancient civilization had this level of astronomical knowledge." "No human civilization," Sarah corrected quietly. The implications hung between them like a physical presence. Marcus had spent his career building technologies that pushed the boundaries of human capability, but this was something beyond even his wildest innovations. He approached another section of wall where the carvings seemed to form a narrative sequence, figures that looked almost human but possessed elongated skulls and what appeared to be additional digits on their hands. "They're teaching something," he realized, studying the progression of images. "Look, here they're showing humans how to work metal, how to cultivate crops, how to read the stars." Sarah joined him, her archaeological training bringing order to the chaos of symbols. "It's a record, a historical account of contact between two species." She paused at one particular carving. "Marcus, this figure here, it's holding something." The object in the carved figure's hands was unmistakable, despite the primitive artistic style. It was the same crystalline artifact they had found in the cabin, rendered in stone with meticulous detail. "A key," Marcus said, understanding flooding through him. "It was always meant to be a key." He pulled the crystal from his backpack, and immediately the chamber responded. The symbols on the walls began to glow more brightly, and a low harmonic tone filled the air. The crystal in his hands grew warm, then hot, then suddenly cool again as it synchronized with whatever ancient technology still functioned in this place. A section of the far wall began to move, stone grinding against stone as it revealed another passage. But this wasn't carved from rock. Beyond the opening, Marcus could see smooth surfaces that reflected their lights like polished metal. "We should be careful," Sarah warned. But Marcus was already moving forward, drawn by a compulsion he couldn't name. The passage led to a circular chamber with a domed ceiling that rose far above their light's reach. In the center stood a structure that defied easy description. Part machine, part sculpture, its surfaces covered in the same crystalline material as the key. As they approached, panels began to illuminate, displaying what could only be star maps, but viewed from perspectives no terrestrial observer could achieve. "It's still active," Sarah whispered. "After all this time, it's still functioning." Marcus placed the crystal into an obvious receptacle at the structure's base. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Light flooded the chamber as the entire mechanism came to life, projecting three-dimensional images into the air around them. They found themselves standing in the midst of a holographic display showing the solar system, but not as it appeared today. The images shifted, showing Earth's surface millions of years ago, then fast-forwarding through geological ages. They watched continents drift, ice ages come and go, and life evolve in accelerated time. But interwoven throughout the display were other images. Ships that moved between stars, civilizations that rose and fell on distant worlds, and always the tall figures with elongated skulls, watching, recording, occasionally intervening. "It's a library," Marcus realized, "an archive of galactic history." The projections focused on Earth's more recent past, showing the arrival of the tall figures roughly 15,000 years ago. They watched as these beings established hidden outposts, made contact with early human civilizations, and shared selected knowledge before departing once again for the stars. But the final sequence showed something different. The figures hiding their technology, sealing their archives, and leaving behind only the keys and the knowledge that someday, when humanity was ready, they would return to claim their inheritance among the stars. The projections faded, leaving Marcus and Sarah standing in stunned silence. The weight of discovery pressed down upon them, but beneath it, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since that terrible day when his world collapsed. Purpose. The ancient chamber trembled as Marcus pressed his palm against the crystalline surface of the artifact. Energy coursed through the walls, and the hieroglyphs began to glow with an intensity that made his eyes water. Dr. Sarah Winters grabbed his arm, her face pale in the pulsing light. "Marcus, something's wrong," she whispered. "The resonance frequency is spiking beyond anything we've recorded." The artifact beneath his hand grew warm, then hot. Through the crystal, he could see geometric patterns shifting and realigning, as if responding to his touch. The chamber's walls hummed with a deep subsonic vibration that he felt in his bones. "It's not wrong," Marcus said, his voice distant. "It's awakening." Behind them, Elena Vasquez barked orders into her radio, her team of mercenaries spreading out along the chamber's perimeter. She'd been surprisingly quiet since they'd descended into the depths beneath the Oregon Mountain, but Marcus could see the hunger in her eyes as she stared at the artifact. "Chen, step away from that thing," she commanded. "We don't know what kind of energy we're dealing with." But Marcus couldn't move. Images flooded his mind, not his own memories, but something older, deeper. He saw vast cities that defied architectural logic, their spires reaching toward alien constellations. He witnessed beings of impossible height and grace, their faces obscured by masks that seemed to shift between matter and light. And through it all, he felt their knowledge, their understanding of forces that human science had barely begun to comprehend. "They were trying to warn us," he said, his hand still pressed against the crystal. "The people who built this place, who created these chambers, they weren't the first civilization to find this technology." Sarah's instruments were screaming now, digital displays flashing red warnings. "Marcus, the electromagnetic field is building toward a cascade event. If this thing has any kind of quantum entanglement capabilities—" "It does." The voice came from the chamber's entrance, and they all turned to see Dr. James Wright limping into the space, his face gaunt but his eyes burning with purpose. "And Elena's employers know exactly what it's capable of." Elena's weapon was in her hands before Wright finished speaking. "You should have stayed in that cave, Doctor. Your part in this is finished." "My part?" Wright laughed bitterly. "I've been studying these sites for 30 years, Elena. I know what your shadow organization wants with this technology, and I won't let it happen." Marcus felt the artifact pulse beneath his palm, and suddenly he understood. The visions crystallized into clarity. This wasn't just an archaeological find. It was a test, a threshold that every sufficiently advanced civilization eventually encountered. And most of them failed. "The artifact isn't a weapon," he said, turning to face Elena. "It's a key. But not to power or knowledge. It's a key to joining something larger, a network of civilizations that have passed beyond the need for conquest and exploitation." Elena's laugh was cold. "Spare me the mystical nonsense, Chen. That crystal contains energy patterns that could revolutionize everything from space travel to military applications. The market value alone—" "There is no market for this," Wright interrupted, "because civilizations that try to monetize or weaponize this technology destroy themselves. That's what happened to the builders of this place. They reached this threshold and they chose wrong." "We have to choose," he said, looking between Sarah and Elena. "Right now, in this moment, do we try to take this knowledge and use it for profit and power, or do we accept that some discoveries require us to evolve beyond our current nature?" Elena raised her weapon. "The only choice here is whether you step away from that crystal voluntarily or I drag your corpse away from it." But before she could fire, the chamber filled with a sound like singing crystal. The artifact's glow intensified, and suddenly Marcus could see the quantum threads that connected this place to others, hidden sites scattered across the globe, all part of a vast network left by the ancient civilization. And in that network, he sensed other consciousnesses, other seekers who had reached this same crossroads. Sarah's hand found his shoulder. "Whatever you're going to do, Marcus, do it now. The structural integrity is failing." Through the artifact, Marcus felt the weight of choice pressing down on him. He could see the paths branching out before them, one leading to unimaginable technological advancement and inevitable self-destruction, the other requiring a leap of faith into something unprecedented in human history. Elena's finger tightened on the trigger, and Wright stepped between them, his face serene despite the chaos erupting around them. The ancient chamber groaned, reality itself seeming to bend around the artifact's growing power. Time slowed, and Marcus realized that everything, his lost fortune, his family's death, his journey to this forgotten corner of Oregon, had led to this single crucial moment of decision. The helicopter's rotors thundered overhead as Marcus pressed himself against the cold stone wall of the cave entrance. Through the narrow opening, he could see the spotlight sweeping across the forest floor, searching. Sarah crouched beside him, her laptop clutched protectively against her chest, the translated tablet's contents still glowing on the screen. "They found us faster than I expected," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the mechanical roar. "There's another way out," Marcus said, remembering the crude map he'd sketched of the tunnel system. "The passages connect to a ravine about 2 miles north." Sarah's eyes reflected the distant spotlight as it swept past again. "What about the artifacts? We can't just leave them. We can't protect them if we're in federal custody either." The helicopter moved away, but Marcus knew it was temporary. Dr. Elizabeth Vance had resources he couldn't match, and her government connections ran deep. When Sarah had tried to contact her archaeological colleagues about the discovery, they'd learned that Vance had already been making inquiries, claiming the site was connected to national security concerns. They gathered their essential gear, Sarah's laptop, Marcus's translated notes, and photographs of the most significant finds. The rest would have to remain hidden. Marcus had spent hours concealing the entrance to the inner chambers, hoping that if Vance's team found the site, they'd miss the most important discoveries. The cave tunnel angled downward, carved from natural rock formations but clearly modified by human hands thousands of years ago. Their flashlight beams revealed more inscriptions along the walls, symbols that Sarah had identified as being similar to Proto-Sumerian script, but far more sophisticated. "Marcus, look at this." Sarah stopped suddenly, her light fixed on a section of wall where the symbols seemed to shimmer. He moved closer, running his fingers along the carved surface. The stone was different here, almost metallic in composition. "It's warm," he said, surprised. Sarah pulled out her tablet, comparing the symbols to her translation software. "These aren't just star maps," she said, her voice filled with excitement despite their circumstances. "They're describing some kind of energy source. The civilization that built this place, they had technology we're only beginning to understand." A distant sound echoed through the tunnels behind them, voices and the scrape of boots on stone. Vance's team had found the cave entrance. "We need to move," Marcus urged, but Sarah was frantically photographing the wall inscriptions. "This could be the most important discovery in human history," she said. "We can't let them bury it. We can't protect it if we're captured." They pressed deeper into the tunnels, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter but never disappearing entirely. The passage began to slope upward, and Marcus felt a faint current of fresh air on his face. They were close to the exit, but as they rounded a bend, their flashlights illuminated something that stopped them both in their tracks. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber, far larger than anything they'd discovered before, and in the center, partially buried under millennia of sediment, stood a structure that defied explanation. It was clearly artificial, constructed from the same unusual metallic stone they'd found in the walls, but its design was unlike anything from any known ancient civilization. Geometric patterns covered its surface, and even in the dim light of their flashlights, it seemed to pulse with an internal energy. "Oh my God," Sarah breathed. "What is it?" Marcus approached carefully, his engineer's mind trying to process what he was seeing. The structure was roughly pyramidal, but with surfaces that curved in mathematically impossible ways. As he drew closer, the symbols on its surface began to glow more brightly. "The tablets," he said suddenly. "The ones that led us here, they weren't just describing this place. They were describing this thing." Sarah was already setting up her equipment, her archaeological training overriding their immediate danger. "The energy readings are off the charts," she said, checking her instruments. "Whatever this is, it's still active after all these centuries." The sound of voices in the tunnels grew louder. Vance's team was methodically searching every passage, and it was only a matter of time before they found this chamber. Marcus made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of fleeing, he placed his hand against the glowing surface of the structure. The moment his skin made contact, the chamber filled with light, and images flooded his mind. Star maps, equations, and knowledge that humanity had lost long before recorded history began. He understood now why Vance was so desperate to control this discovery. This wasn't just archaeology. It was the key to technologies that could change everything. The voices were getting closer. Whatever happened next would determine not just their fate, but the future of human knowledge itself. The descent into the cavern felt like traveling backward through time itself. Marcus's headlamp carved through darkness that seemed older than civilization, illuminating walls covered in symbols that defied everything he thought he knew about human history. Behind him, Sarah's breathing echoed in the narrow passage, while ahead, Dr. Reeves moved with the careful precision of someone who had made this journey before. "The carbon dating results came back yesterday," Reeves said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The organic materials we found down here are over 40,000 years old. But that's not the remarkable part. They emerged into a vast underground chamber that stole Marcus's breath. The space stretched beyond the reach of their lights, supported by natural stone columns that had been carved and shaped by human hands. But these weren't crude cave paintings or primitive scratches in stone. These were architectural modifications that displayed an understanding of engineering that shouldn't have existed for millennia. "Oh my God," Sarah breathed, raising her camera. Marcus stepped forward, his light revealing intricate geometric patterns carved into the floor beneath their feet. The symbols weren't random, they formed complex mathematical sequences that he recognized from his work in quantum computing. "This is impossible." "That's what I thought too," Reeves said, leading them deeper into the chamber. "Until we found the real discovery." They passed carved alcoves filled with artifacts that challenged every timeline Marcus had ever learned. Stone tablets covered in script that resembled no known ancient language, yet somehow felt familiar. Tools crafted from materials that shouldn't have been available to prehistoric peoples. And everywhere, those recurring symbols that seemed to bridge the gap between ancient mysticism and modern science. "Marcus," Sarah called from across the chamber, "you need to see this." He followed her voice to where she stood before a section of wall that had been carved into what could only be described as a star map. But this wasn't crude constellation scratching. This was precise astronomical calculation, showing celestial positions and planetary alignments with mathematical accuracy. "The alignment patterns," Marcus said, studying the carvings. "They match the computational models I was working on before." He stopped, remembering that his previous life felt like it belonged to someone else entirely. "Before your company collapsed," Reeves finished. "Yes, I know about your background, Marcus. That's actually why I've been hoping you'd find this place." Marcus turned to face the archaeologist, a chill running down his spine that had nothing to do with the cavern's temperature. "What do you mean?" "The quantum computing research you were doing. The algorithms for predicting complex system behaviors. It wasn't as revolutionary as you thought. The mathematical principles you discovered? They're all here, carved in stone 40,000 years ago. Sarah lowered her camera, her face pale in the LED light. You're saying that Marcus independently rediscovered something that ancient people already knew? Marcus felt the weight of implications crashing over him. The mathematical sequences in my algorithms, how could you possibly know they match what's down here? Because I've been studying these symbols for 3 years. I've had teams of mathematicians and computer scientists analyzing them remotely, feeding me information through encrypted channels. When your name started appearing in research papers on quantum prediction models, I knew I had to bring you here. The chamber suddenly felt smaller, despite its vast dimensions. Marcus realized that his finding the cabin, his discovery of the archaeological site, none of it had been coincidence. You orchestrated this. You wanted me to find this place. Not orchestrated, hoped for. After your company collapsed, after you retreated from the world, I thought you might be in the right mindset to truly see what we've uncovered here. Sometimes you have to lose everything before you can understand what really matters. Sarah stepped between them, her journalistic instincts flaring. What exactly are you two talking about? You're saying that ancient people had quantum computing? Not quantum computing as we understand it, Reeves replied. Something else. Something that achieved the same results through entirely different means. The question isn't how they did it, it's why they stopped. Marcus approached another wall section, where symbols seemed to tell a story in pictographic form. Images of great cities, of technologies that bent natural forces to human will, and then darkness, destruction, a deliberate abandonment of everything they had built. They destroyed their own civilization, he said, understanding flooding through him. They reached a point where they realized their technology was too dangerous to continue. And now we're approaching that same point again, Reeves said quietly. Which is why I need your help to decode the final chamber, because if I'm right about what's down there, it contains not just the proof of their technological achievement, but the warning they left behind for whoever came after them. The darkness beyond their light seemed to pulse with ancient secrets, waiting to reveal truths that could change everything. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Oregon wilderness as Marcus stood at the edge of the excavation site, watching the final pieces of equipment being loaded onto trucks. 3 months had passed since the discovery that changed everything, not just his life, but humanity's understanding of its own origins. Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, approached with a tablet displaying the latest translation results. The ancient symbols carved into the chamber walls had revealed a story that archaeologists and linguists would spend decades unraveling. A civilization that had thrived here 15,000 years ago, possessing knowledge that challenged every assumption about human development. The university wants to establish a permanent research station, Sarah said, her breath visible in the crisp air. This site will be studied for generations. Marcus nodded, his gaze fixed on the carefully covered entrance to the underground chambers. The past few months had been a whirlwind of scientific teams, media attention, and legal proceedings. The discovery had made him wealthy again, not through technology this time, but through careful licensing agreements and partnerships with academic institutions worldwide. His phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Flight lands at 2 p.m. Can't wait to see you. The reconciliation with his daughter had been gradual, built on honest conversations and his genuine commitment to being present in her life. She was flying in from Boston, where she'd been completing her graduate studies in environmental science. The irony wasn't lost on him that his retreat from the digital world had led to the greatest discovery of his career, and more importantly, to rebuilding the relationship that mattered most. Detective Ray Morrison emerged from one of the research trailers, carrying a box of files. The investigation into Marcus's financial collapse had finally concluded. 3 executives from Chen Industries now faced federal charges for embezzlement and fraud. Justice moved slowly, but it moved. Heading back to Portland, Ray said, extending his hand. This has been one hell of a case. From investigating your disappearance, to uncovering corporate fraud, to witnessing the archaeological find of the century. My report's going to read like fiction. Marcus shook his hand firmly. Thank you for not giving up on the truth. After Ray departed, Marcus walked the familiar trail to his cabin. He'd decided to keep the property, converting it into a comfortable base camp for the research operations. The rustic structure that had sheltered him during his darkest period now served as a bridge between his old life and whatever came next. Inside, he found Dr. Yuki Tanaka carefully packing the last of the artifact samples. The young archaeologist had become the project's lead researcher, her expertise in ancient civilizations proving invaluable in interpreting the discovery. The carbon dating results came back, she said, holding up a sealed container. 15,200 years old, plus or minus 50 years. The implications are staggering. Marcus picked up a photograph from the table, an image of the central chamber's wall carvings depicting advanced astronomical knowledge and sophisticated engineering techniques. The civilization that had built this place understood concepts that mainstream archaeology insisted humans hadn't developed until thousands of years later. What do you think happened to them? He asked. Yuki carefully sealed the container. Climate change, most likely. The end of the last ice age would have dramatically altered this region. They either migrated or adapted beyond recognition. But they left us this gift, proof that human ingenuity and knowledge run deeper than we ever imagined. That afternoon, Marcus drove to the small regional airport to meet Emma's flight. She emerged from the terminal looking older, more confident than when he'd last seen her. The awkward teenager had grown into a poised young woman with her mother's determined expression and his own curious eyes. "Dad," she said, embracing him warmly. "You look different. Happier." "I've been thinking about Mom a lot," Emma said as they neared the cabin, "about what she'd say about all this." Marcus felt the familiar ache of loss, but it was gentler now, tempered by time and healing. She'd be fascinated by the archaeological aspects, and she'd probably lecture me about proper scientific documentation procedures. Emma laughed. "Sounds like Mom." They spent the evening on the cabin's porch, watching the stars emerge above the forest canopy. The excavation site lay quiet below them, its secrets temporarily at rest, while researchers analyzed and catalogued each precious artifact. "What's next?" Emma asked. Marcus considered the question. He had offers from universities, publishing houses, and documentary filmmakers. The world wanted to understand both the discovery and the man who'd found it. "I'm thinking about writing a book," he said finally, "about losing everything and finding something greater, about the importance of preserving our past to understand our future." Above them, the ancient stars continued their eternal dance, the same constellations that had guided the mysterious civilization buried beneath their feet.